if you're watching this video, you're on one of two paths. If you're on path one, you're continuing to exchange your expertise and your intellectual capital for a paycheck. In other words, your intellectual capital, your knowledge, experience, and expertise is being consumed inside someone else's organization. In other words, you're helping build someone else's vision in exchange for a paycheck, and you're dependent on earned income from that organization. Or you may be on path two. Path two is where you're learning how to build assets from your expertise and your intellectual capital. It means you're owning and leveraging your expertise for yourself. It also means you're building your own vision, and it means you're creating income from assets that you actually own. If you're on path one, then this training helps move you to path two, recognizing your intellectual capital as something you can own, leverage, and build from, so that you can stop exchanging your expertise for a paycheck and start building something you can own, and so you can stop leaving money, opportunities, and intellectual capital on the table. In this video training, you'll learn how to avoid spending the next 10, 20, or even 30 years exchanging your expertise for a paycheck when you could be building assets you own. And that shift could cost literally hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars in unrealized value over the remainder of your career. Now, if you're on path two already, you're going to avoid costly mistakes that I made on my journey, so you can accelerate your growth by learning lessons that took me years to learn. Now, in this video, I'm going to walk you through 3 lessons that completely changed the way I think about expertise, consulting, and building something of my own. First, we're going to talk about assets and intellectual capital, because many highly educated women are sitting on valuable assets they don't even recognize. And I'll show you how understanding this concept changed the trajectory of my business. The second thing I'm going to do is share one of the biggest mistakes I made as an entrepreneur and as a consultant. See, I spent years following advice from people who didn't understand the consulting industry, and I'll show you why consulting businesses are built differently and the framework I now use to build consulting businesses around intellectual capital. And third, we're going to talk about faith. Not faith as passive belief, but faith as execution without evidence. I'll share why I believe so many women delay the outcomes they're praying for by waiting for certainty, and why some of the biggest breakthroughs in my life happened because I was willing to move before I had all the answers. So by the end of this video, you'll have a different way of thinking about your expertise, a clearer understanding of how consulting businesses create value, and a framework for taking action on the vision you've been carrying. All right, so let's start with a concept that completely changed the way I think about business, wealth, and even my own expertise. So for years, I didn't understand what an asset was. Now, if someone had asked me to define an asset, I probably would have said something like a house, a car, stocks, or investments. But an asset is simply something that has value and can produce value. Now, that's important because many of us have spent our entire lives accumulating assets without ever recognizing them as assets. We went to school, we earned degrees, we gained professional experience and expertise. We led teams. We solved problems. Some of us conducted research, or we served people. We survived difficult seasons in our lives. We've learned lessons through both success and failure. And yet, many of us have been conditioned to see those things as qualifications for a job rather than assets that hold value. Now, that's where intellectual capital comes in. Intellectual capital is the knowledge, the expertise, the experience, the wisdom, research, insights, methodologies, and lessons you've accumulated throughout your life and your career. It's everything you know because of what you've studied, what you've practiced, what you've built, what you've survived, and what you've learned. And here is what I wish someone had told me years ago. Your intellectual capital is one of your most valuable assets. Now, the reason this lesson is so important to me is because when I first started my consulting business, I didn't understand any of this. I didn't know what intellectual capital was. I didn't know how to identify it. I didn't know that it had value or even how to value it. And because I didn't understand it, I spent years chasing trends, following other people's ideas, and trying to build a business around what everyone else said was valuable. I was constantly looking outside of myself for answers. And what I didn't realize at that time was that I was sitting on decades of education, leadership experience, ministry experience, professional experience, wisdom, and lessons learned that already had tremendous value in the market. See, the problem wasn't that I lacked expertise. The problem was that I didn't recognize my expertise as an asset that held value. And that's the principle I want you to take away from this first lesson. See, you cannot leverage what you do not recognize. If you don't recognize the value of what you've already accumulated, you'll spend years looking outside yourself for something that's already within you. So here's a simple exercise I'd encourage you to do. Start making a list, okay? And in this list, you're going to write down your education. You're going to write down your certifications, your trainings, courses you've taken. You're going to write down your leadership experience. I need you to write down the problems that you've solved, no matter how big or small. I need you to write down the lessons that you've learned in your life. I want you to write down the challenges that you've overcome. I need you to get clear and write down the research that you've conducted. Write down the wisdom you've gained through your personal and your professional journey. Why? Because what you're going to discover is that you've been carrying monetizable intellectual capital without ever recognizing it as an asset. If you're sitting there looking at this list and you're thinking to yourself, this is a lot, don't worry. I've actually created something called the Intellectual Capital Snapshot to help simplify this process for you. It's free, will take under 3 minutes. All you do is answer 3 simple questions, and based on your responses, you'll receive a personalized report that helps you begin identifying some of the intellectual capital that you've been accumulating through your education, expertise, experience, and life journey. It's a quick way to start seeing the value you may have been overlooking for years. And if you'd like to try it for yourself, you'll find the link below this video. Now, let me share the second lesson, because once I finally began recognizing my intellectual capital, I made a mistake that cost me years of time and money. The second lesson I want to share with you today is that not all business advice is created equal, especially when you're building a consulting business. One of the biggest mistakes I made on my entrepreneur journey was investing in coaches, programs, courses, and training that taught generic business strategies but did not understand the consulting industry. They understood marketing, they understood sales, they understood online business, but they didn't understand how consulting businesses actually create value. And so as a result, I spent years trying to force myself into business models that didn't fit who I was, what I knew or the expertise I had accumulated over decades. See, I was being taught to focus on tactics before I understood the true value of the intellectual capital I already possessed. The principle I learned is this: a consulting business is only as valuable as the intellectual capital that differentiates it. People do not hire consultants simply because they have a website, a social media page, or a funnel. Those things are important, but people hire consultants because they possess expertise, experience, frameworks, methodologies, insights, and solutions that help solve meaningful and expensive problems. The question is not, how do I start a business? Oh no. The right question you should be asking yourself is, what makes my expertise different, valuable, and worthy of investment? And that's why I developed the ICCO Framework. The first step in my method is executive identity. Before you build a consulting business, you need clarity around who you are, how you lead, and the unique perspective you bring to the marketplace. Step 2 in the ICCO framework is intellectual capital extraction. This is where you identify and organize the expertise, experience, education, research, and wisdom you've accumulated throughout your life and career. The third step is the signature framework architecture. This is where you transform your intellectual capital into a methodology that helps people achieve a specific outcome. The fourth step is signature consulting offer architecture. Now, this is where you package that framework into a consulting offer. Now, the fifth and final step in my ICCO framework is signature client acquisition architecture. This is where you build a system for attracting and converting the right clients. Now, a bad way to do this is by building a consulting business by copying somebody else's content, their offer, positioning, or their business model. Now, a better way for you to do this is to build your consulting business around your own intellectual capital, around your own frameworks, your own experience, and your own unique perspective. See, the goal here is not to become a copy of someone else. No, you want to build an original consulting company off of your unique perspectives. The goal here is to build a consulting business that reflects the value of what you've spent years learning, building, researching, and experiencing. And if you're ready to identify your own intellectual capital, be sure to take the intellectual capital snapshot below. It's free, takes under 3 minutes. And at the end of that experience, you'll have an opportunity to unlock the full intellectual capital extraction system. All right, so before we close, I want to leave you with one final thought. For years, I believed what many of you believe. See, we were taught to believe that our education, our expertise, our experience, and our hard work were primarily tools for helping other organizations achieve their goals in exchange for a paycheck. What I didn't understand, and what you probably don't either, was that I was sitting on a reservoir of intellectual capital that had value beyond a job title, beyond a paycheck, and beyond the walls of any institution. The moment I began to see my expertise differently, I began to see myself differently. And that's the principle I want to leave you with today. See, your intellectual capital is not just evidence of where you've been. It may be the blueprint for where you're going. I believe that it is. Everything you've learned, everything you've built, everything you've researched, everything you've survived, everything you've overcome in life. Listen to me, none of it was wasted. There is value in all of it. There is wisdom in all of it. There is potential in all of it. But the question is whether you're willing to recognize it, organize it, and act on it. And if you're ready to learn how to do that at a much deeper level, I want you to watch this training, How to Build a $1 Million Consulting Business Using Your Intellectual Capital. In that masterclass, I show you how to take the intellectual capital that we've discussed today and begin transforming it into consulting offers, frameworks, and revenue generating assets. I'll see you in the next video. If this video was helpful, make sure you subscribe to Leadership Rewired for more conversations on intellectual capital, consulting, leadership, and building what's next. I'll see you in the next video.